There was a factory that once never slept, a place that used to run 24 hours a day, now no longer makes a single sound. There was a time when more than 1 million bicycles left this place every year. A quarter of America once rode on what was made here. And then, in just over 2 decades, the empire was gone. Not because they were not big enough, and not because they were not good enough. How does a company that once saw the future become blind to itself? That story began in a small machine shop in Europe at the end of the 19th century. Ignaz Schwinn was not born into a wealthy family. He lost his father at a young age and began apprenticing in mechanical work very early. He grew up surrounded by metal machine oil and machines that were still far from perfect. He did not just repair things. He observed, understood how things worked, and looked for ways to make them better. But the more deeply he understood the bicycle, the more he began to realize something else. It was not about engineering, it was about the market. Europe was already beginning to saturate. And on the other side of the ocean, there was a place where demand was rising by the day, a place where the system had not yet been fully built: Chicago. In 1891, Ignaz Schwinn left Europe, not to find a job, but to build something he believed would become bigger than anything that had existed before. He did not just see a product, he saw a system. And in an industry that was heading toward collapse, it was precisely his ability to see the future that helped him survive. But seeing the future was one thing. Turning it into reality was something else. In 1895, Ignaz Schwinn partnered with Adolf Arnold, a man who had what he still lacked: capital. One understood machinery, the other understood money, and together they began to build a system. While most of the bicycle industry at the time was chasing volume, Schwinn chose a different path: quality, durability, and design that was right from the beginning. That was not just a product decision. It was how they designed the entire system: fewer defects, lower warranty costs, and greater trust. And trust creates repeat demand. Not long after, a major opportunity appeared. A corporation trying to control the entire American bicycle industry wanted to buy them out. They refused, not because they did not need the money, but because they did not want to become part of a system they did not control. A few years later, that very corporation collapsed. Schwinn was still standing. As the rest of the industry contracted, they did the opposite. They bought what was left behind, expanded production, and step by step became the center of that system. Not through speed, but through structure. They even expanded into motorcycles, a fast-growing and highly profitable business. But unlike many other companies, they never forgot. What was holding this entire system together? Bicycles were still the foundation, not a side business, but the core of the entire system. They did not just respond to the market, they saw the future and acted before it arrived. And this time, they were right. But then, the world changed, not from within the system, but from outside it. In 1929, the Great Depression began. Incomes fell, spending contracted, and the things people did not absolutely need were the first things to go. At that point, Schwinn was not just making bicycles. They also had another business, one that was doing very well: motorcycles. Revenue was steady, orders were still coming in. And from a conventional point of view, there was no reason to stop. But they stopped anyway, shutting down the entire motorcycle business. Not because it had failed, but because they saw what would happen next. When money becomes scarce, people do not buy what they want, they buy what they need. At the same time, a new generation began entering the system: Frank W. Schwinn, Ignaz's son, bringing a different perspective with him. They did not just keep the system alive, they improved it larger, tires, greater stability, a better fit, for the reality of how people actually used the product. And more importantly, they kept doing what had helped them survive from the beginning, controlling quality at every step. When the crisis passed, they were not just still there, they were stronger than before. They saw the future before everyone else did. And once again, they were right. As the crisis passed, a different America began to take shape. After the Second World War, the population grew rapidly and the suburbs expanded. And for the first time, children became a massive market. The bicycle was no longer just a means of transportation. It became part of childhood, a gift, a symbol of early freedom. And this was where Schwinn's system truly stood apart. They did not sell through mass retail stores. They built an exclusive dealer network that was trained, controlled, and consistent in the experience it delivered. That gave them control over everything: pricing, brand image, and the way customers experienced the product. When kids in California began building their own customized bikes, Schwinn did not ignore it. They turned it into a product, the Stingray. By the 1960s, that system had reached its peak. More than 1 million bicycles a year, roughly a quarter of the American market. It was an almost perfect system. Production was controlled, distribution was controlled, experience was controlled. But sometimes, the systems that work too well are the ones that become hardest to change. And while they were still refining their own system, the outside world had already begun to change. In the early 1970s, two things happened at once. The oil crisis made transportation more expensive, and a new wave began to rise: fitness and a more active way of life. For the first time, the bicycle was no longer just a product for children. It became a tool for adults, for exercise, for mobility, and for higher performance. The standard had changed. It was no longer about what was most durable, but about what was lighter, faster, and more adaptable across different conditions. Meanwhile, manufacturers from Japan and Europe were already prepared. By the middle of the 1970s, imported bicycles accounted for nearly half of the American market. They were cheaper, lighter, and often more modern. Schwinn, meanwhile, was still doing what it had always done exceptionally well: building bicycles that were durable, solid, and tightly controlled. It was no longer a question of quality. The real issue was fit. A system optimized for durability could not quickly shift to one optimized for performance. And as cost competition intensified, domestic manufacturing gradually became a disadvantage in an increasingly globalized market. And when a system has been optimized too well, everything inside it becomes harder to change even after the market already has. The first signals had already appeared, but this time, they did not see them. At first, they were only very small signals, until they could no longer be ignored. In the early 1970s, kids in California began racing on dirt tracks. They were not buying new bikes. They were taking old cruisers and modifying them themselves: higher handlebars, sturdier frames built to no standard at all, except the way they actually used the bike. From Schwinn's point of view, this was not a clearly defined market. There were no standards, no distribution system, and it did not fit the image they had spent years building. But just a few years later, BMX became a real segment. New companies entered, products were standardized, and that market grew without them. Elsewhere in California, a group of adults began experimenting with a different idea. They took bicycles into the mountains and adapted them to handle rough terrain. Those were the first mountain bikes. The idea itself was not entirely unfamiliar to Schwinn, but within their system, it was not big enough, not clear enough, and not aligned with the way they understood the market. By the early 1980s, mountain bikes had become one of the fastest growing segments in the industry, and new companies had built their entire systems around it. Another new trend had emerged. But this time, they were not the ones building it. They had once seen the future. But this time, they were standing outside it. And once enough opportunities had been missed, the consequences began to appear. Inside the system, its limits were starting to show. The Chicago factory, once the center of everything, had become old, less flexible, and increasingly expensive to operate. Labor costs were rising. Conflicts with the union were becoming more visible. And each time the lines slowed down, the advantages they once had slipped further away. Outside, competitors were cheaper and faster. Inside, everything was slower and more expensive. That gap kept getting wider. Eventually, they made the decision they had long tried to avoid: moving production overseas. Not to grow, but to keep the system functioning. But by then, they were already losing the level of production control they once had. The product was no longer clearly distinct, and the system advantage began to disappear. The market responded in a very simple way. Consumers moved toward options that fit better. Their system no longer belonged to this moment, and Schwinn was no longer the name in front. Not everything collapses in a single moment. They did not become weak. They were still disciplined, still highly controlled, still making products that were very good. But the problem was no longer quality. It was that they did not change fast enough. When everything around them already had success, was not what killed them. It was the way they held on to that success that did. And Schwinn was not the only case. Many other companies, once leaders in their fields, met the same fate. But not everything disappeared. At Waterford Precision Cycles, the craftsmen who had once helped build Schwinn continued their work with the same precision, the same standard of quality, only now within a system better suited to the world of today. Every system reaches a moment when it needs to change. Somewhere, a Schwinn bicycle still exists. They once saw the future and acted before it arrived. It was a system that once worked extremely well. It was just that it no longer fit the world around it. And the question is, are each of us repeating the same pattern in a different way?